Have you ever noticed how the ones who seem most peaceful are the ones who slowly vanish from the noise? They're not gone, they've just stepped away. From chaos, from the constant chase, from a world that's too loud to hear its own heart. Spiritually awake people, they're not running away from life. They're walking toward truth. These are the ones who once tried to fit in. They tried to speak light into rooms filled with ego. They tried to share kindness in places that value control. And when no one listened, they didn't fight. They became silent. Because awakening doesn't make you louder. It makes you calmer. They disappear not because they don't care, but because they finally understand that silence speaks louder than arguments. They've learned that protecting their peace is more powerful than proving their point. Think about it. In a world obsessed with validation, who dares to disappear? Only those who no longer need to be seen to feel alive. These people stop posting every thought. They stop reacting to every opinion. They stop trying to fix what refuses to change. And society calls it disappearing. But in truth, it's returning home. They're not vanishing from humanity. They're rediscovering it. They spend more time in nature, in quiet reflection, in gratitude. They begin to see how noise has become normal, and peace, the rarest form of rebellion. A spiritually awake person looks at the world and sees layers. Ego, fear, competition. They see people chasing what doesn't last, defending what doesn't matter. And one day they realize, you can't wake up a world that wants to stay asleep. So they stop trying. Instead, they start being. They radiate calm energy in a world burning with restlessness. They teach not through words, but through presence. When they enter a room, the energy shifts. You can feel it. Not loud, not demanding, just peaceful. But here's the paradox. Society rarely understands them. The quiet ones are often misunderstood as distant or lost. Yet they're the ones who have found the most. They found the courage to let go. They found the wisdom to stop arguing with darkness. They found that true connection starts within. So yes, the spiritually awake are disappearing, but not into emptiness, into wholeness. Maybe that's the message for us all. That disappearing isn't the end. It's a return to self, to peace, to purpose. Because sometimes the loudest way to awaken the world is to simply live differently. Here are some key points related to this. Spiritually awake people withdraw to protect their peace, not out of weakness. Their silence is strength, not absence. True awakening often separates you from the noise of the world. You can't awaken a world that chooses to stay asleep. Presence and peace teach louder than words ever can. Disappearing is not escaping. It's returning home to self. They don't leave because they're weak. They leave because they finally learned the cost of peace. For years, they tried to blend in, smiling when their heart was heavy, staying quiet when their spirit was screaming. They tried to explain their truth to people who only wanted to win arguments. They poured their energy into fixing relationships, jobs, and situations that drained them, until one day, they realized that peace isn't found in the approval of others. It's found in the courage to walk away from what hurts your soul. Imagine a person who once lit up every room, always available, always helping, always saying yes. Slowly, their light starts to flicker, not because they've lost their spark, but because too many people have borrowed their flame and never gave it back. So one morning, they stop replying as quickly. They spend more time alone. They begin to choose silence over noise, solitude over chaos. And people start to whisper, they've changed. But what really changed is that they stop betraying themselves just to be understood. Protecting your peace doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care differently now. You no longer give energy to battles that lead nowhere. You no longer chase closure from those who only gave confusion. You stop expecting empathy from hearts still ruled by ego. It's a quiet transformation, almost invisible to the outside world. But inside, it's liberation. There's a quote that says, "The quieter you become, the more you hear." And that's exactly what happens. When the spiritually awake step back, they start hearing their own soul again. The noise of the world fades, and the whisper of truth returns. They start noticing small things, the wind brushing against the trees, the sunlight filtering through curtains, the sound of their own breathing. It's like rediscovering life after years of being half asleep. Sometimes protecting peace looks like deleting old messages you'll never get answers from. Sometimes it's walking away from conversations that go in circles. Sometimes it's smiling at someone you've forgiven without needing to reconnect. Every act of silence becomes a statement. I choose myself this time. The spiritually awake aren't escaping the world. They're rebalancing it. They've learned that constantly trying to fix others only leaves them broken. They've learned that no amount of explaining can make someone hear what they're not ready to understand. So they stop forcing connection and start nurturing stillness. And in that stillness, they begin to heal. People may call it disappearing, but it's really returning to authenticity, to simplicity, to the self they abandoned while trying to be everything for everyone. Protecting peace is not about isolation. It's about alignment. It's choosing environments where your energy isn't questioned, your silence isn't guilt, and your heart isn't misunderstood. It's about realizing that peace was never meant to be found. It was always meant to be kept. Silence isn't absence. It's presence without noise. It's the space where truth breathes, where clarity is born, and where the spirit finds rest. Spiritually awake people understand this in a way most don't. They've lived the chaos of always having to explain themselves, defend their intentions, or prove their worth. They've seen how words can be twisted, how emotions can be weaponized, and how speaking too much can drain the soul. So they choose silence, not as surrender, but as strength. Because sometimes the loudest statement you can make is made without a single word. Think of a person who once argued with everyone trying to make them understand their perspective. Every conversation turned into a battlefield. They left each one feeling more misunderstood, more exhausted, more disconnected. Then one day they stopped, not because they didn't care anymore, but because they realized that peace cannot coexist with constant explanation. Their silence wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. They began to realize that energy speaks louder than words ever could. There's a moment when silence becomes your teacher, when you realize that reacting to everything robs you of power. A spiritually awake person learns that they don't need to attend every argument they're invited to. They learn that their energy is sacred, and not everyone deserves access to it. Imagine sitting in a room where everyone's voice is raised, each person trying to out-talk the other. The one who stays calm, who simply observes, holds the most control. That calmness, that silence, is not submission, it's mastery. Someone once said, "Don't waste your words on people who deserve your silence." And that's what the spiritually awake embody. They stop justifying their choices to people who never try to understand them. They stop explaining their dreams to those who can't see beyond limitations. They stop giving pieces of themselves in conversations that lead nowhere. Their silence becomes a mirror. It reflects who truly listens and who only hears their own echo. Silence also heals. When you stop talking for a while, you start hearing yourself again. The spiritually awake withdraw into quiet spaces, not because they're lonely, but because they're listening to intuition, to the universe, to the quiet truths hidden beneath all the noise. They begin to notice patterns, the tone of their thoughts, the rhythm of their breathing, the pull of their emotions. In silence, they realize what truly matters and what never did. It's a sacred kind of awareness, the kind that only comes when the world stops demanding a reaction from you. Imagine standing on a mountaintop at sunrise. The world is still, colors shifting in silence. That's what the inner world of the spiritually awake feels like. Still, aware, deep. They no longer chase to be understood because they've accepted that not everyone has a capacity to see beyond their own noise. Instead, they become observers. They smile more. They speak less. They start to value peace over presence. Silence is not the absence of voice. It's the presence of self-control. It's knowing you could say something but choosing not to. It's responding to provocation with stillness, meeting misunderstanding with compassion, and facing chaos with composure. Spiritually awake people know that the moment you argue with ignorance, you give it power. So they choose peace, because peace protects what ego would destroy. There's beauty in being misunderstood and still staying calm. There's power in not explaining your every decision. There's grace in saying nothing when everything in you wants to respond. That's when silence becomes strength. because it means your peace no longer depends on how others perceive you. The spiritually awake don't disappear into quiet. They rise into it. Their silence becomes a language, one that only those who are awake can truly understand. True awakening often separates you from the noise of the world. It's not a punishment. It's a natural shift, a quiet unraveling of everything that once felt familiar. The spiritually awake person doesn't wake up one morning and decide to detach. It happens slowly, almost imperceptibly, like a tide pulling you away from the shore you once called home. One day you're surrounded by people, conversations, and distractions that used to make sense. And then suddenly none of it feels the same. The laughter feels forced. The goals feel shallow. The endless pursuit of validation feels heavy. It's as if your soul has started speaking a new language, and no one around you understands it anymore. You begin to see the world differently. The things that once excited you, competition, recognition, attention, no longer hold the same sparkle. You notice the rush in people's eyes, the constant hunger for more, the restless scrolling, the noise that never stops. And for the first time, it all feels foreign. Awakening doesn't make you superior. It makes you sensitive. You start feeling energies more deeply, seeing patterns in people's behavior, hearing pain behind laughter. And with every realization, you drift further from the crowd. Imagine someone standing in a marketplace, surrounded by shouts, music, movement, and chaos. Everyone is busy trading, buying, selling, shouting over each other. But this person, this newly awakened soul, starts to notice something else. The silence beneath the sound, the emptiness behind the excitement. They realize that the noise isn't life. It's distraction. And so they quietly step back. They walk out of the market, not in rebellion, but in revelation. That's what awakening feels like. Walking away from noise that no longer feels like home. There's a quote that says, "Once you see, you can't unsee." Awakening is like that. Once your eyes open, you can't go back to sleep. You can't pretend the world's illusions are real anymore. You can't laugh at the same shallow jokes or chase the same hollow victories. You stop trying to fill the void with things and people. You realize that peace was never missing. It was just buried under layers of noise. The separation doesn't happen because you stop loving the world. It happens because you start loving it differently. It's a lonely path at first. You might find yourself misunderstood, labeled distant or detached. Friends drift away. Conversations grow shorter. You begin to crave silence over socializing, authenticity over attention. And yet, something inside you feels lighter. You start enjoying solitude not as isolation, but as connection to yourself, to universe, to the truth that moves quietly beneath all things. You begin to see how the noise of the world keeps people asleep, how it drowns intuition and silences the soul. And though you still walk among others, you no longer walk the same way. True awakening separates you, but it also purifies you. It strips away everything false, false ambitions, false identities, false belonging. You start to see that your worth isn't tied to achievement or approval. It's found in stillness, in awareness, in presence. You begin to feel peace in the simplest things. The sound of rain, the rhythm of your breath, the warmth of sunlight on your skin. These moments feel sacred because they're real, untouched by the world's noise. Over time, the separation becomes less painful. You stop longing to fit in because you finally understand that fitting in often means dimming your light. You stop seeking validation because you found something stronger, alignment. The world will still call you distant, strange, maybe even lost. But deep down, you know the truth. You're not lost at all. You've simply stepped into a quieter frequency, one where peace speaks louder than chaos, and the soul finally feels a home. You can't awaken a world that chooses to stay asleep. It's a truth that every spiritually awake soul learns the hard way. At first they try. Oh, how they try. They speak light into dark spaces, offer understanding where there is judgment, and share wisdom with those who aren't ready to hear it. They think if they explain clearly enough, if they love deeply enough, maybe others will see what they see. But they don't, because awakening isn't taught, it's experienced. It's not something you can give. It's something a person must reach for on their own. Imagine standing in a dark room with people who've lived there their entire lives. You find a candle, light it, and say, "Look, here's light." But instead of gratitude, they flinch, cover their eyes, and tell you to put out. They've grown used to the dark. The light feels too bright, too honest, too uncomfortable. That's what it feels like to try to wake a world that isn't ready. The spiritually awake learn that forcing light only creates resistance. So eventually they stop trying to convince and start choosing peace. There's a quiet kind of heartbreak in that realization. You stop trying to change your loved ones. Stop explaining why your priorities have shifted. Stop expecting people to understand your silence. You simply start living your truth and let your energy speak for itself. It's painful to watch people chase illusions you've already outgrown. To see them exhaust themselves in cycles of comparison, ego, and distraction. You wish you could make them see how beautiful peace is, how freeing surrender feels. But you can't force awakening any more than you can force a flower to bloom before its time. Someone once said, you can only meet people as deeply as they've met themselves. And that becomes a compass for the awakened. They start realizing that depth isn't for everyone, that truth can't be poured into closed hearts. So they begin to protect their energy instead of spreading it thin. They stop debating with those who listen to reply, not to understand. They stop proving their path to those who can't see beyond illusion. Their silence becomes not defeat, but wisdom. It's like watching waves crash against a rock. The awakened person learns that no amount of talking will move what isn't meant to move. So instead, they flow around it. They find others who understand, not because they were convinced, but because they too have felt the same shift. Together, they build quiet connections, grounded in truth, not noise. The spiritually awake accept that their role isn't to wake everyone. It's to stay awake themselves, to hold the light steady, even when others close their eyes, to live as an example, not an argument. Because one day, when the noise grows unbearable, when the illusions crack and people start looking for peace, they'll remember the ones who were silent, calm, and centered, the ones who didn't try to convince, but simply were. That's when awakening spreads, not through preaching, but through presence. Presence and peace teach louder than words ever can. The spiritually awake understand this in their bones. They no longer try to convince people with speeches or debates. Instead, they let the quiet power of their energy do the talking. When you stand in front of someone who has found inner peace, you feel it before they even speak. It's in their eyes, their posture, their calmness when others would have lost control. Their presence itself becomes a message, a living reminder that peace is possible, even in chaos. There's a story of a monk who sat by a river every morning. People from a nearby village would come, pour out their troubles, and expect advice. But the monk rarely spoke. He would simply listen, smile gently, and continue gazing at the flowing water. Over time, people began to feel lighter just by sitting near him. One day, a villager finally asked, "Why don't you say anything?" The monk replied softly, "If you listen long enough, silence teaches everything." That's what presence does. It transforms without force, heals without instruction, and awakens without words. Spiritually awake people carry that same kind of energy. You can feel it when they walk into a room. The atmosphere shifts. Arguments lose intensity. Conversations slow down. Even the air seems lighter. They're not performing calmness. They are calmness. Their peace becomes contagious. You notice how they pause before reacting, how they listen without judgment, how they forgive without needing apologies. And in witnessing them, something inside you softens. Their peace becomes your mirror, showing you the parts of yourself still aching for stillness. Words can inspire, but presence transforms. Think about the last time you were around someone who radiated true calm. Maybe it was a teacher, a parent, or even a stranger. They didn't need to tell you what peace was. You felt it. That's the silent teaching of awareness. The spiritually awake don't preach because they've realized that words often dissolve where energy begins. People don't remember what you said. They remember how you made them feel. There's a quote that says, "The way you walk, talk, and breathe is your message to the world." The awakened embody this truth. Their actions become lessons. Their stillness becomes guidance. Their patience in conflict, their kindness under pressure, their refusal to be pulled into negativity. All of it teaches more than any sermon ever could. You can't argue with energy that's peaceful. It disarms the ego and awakens the heart. The beauty of presence is that it doesn't demand attention. It earns it quietly. The spiritually awake don't need to prove their growth. They embody it. When others are lost in chaos, they remain grounded and people notice, not because they shout louder, but because they stand still while the world trembles. Their peace says, there's another way to live, and without even realizing it, they begin to change others, just by being themselves. That's the sacred power of presence. It doesn't ask to be understood. It doesn't need to explain. It simply is. In a world obsessed with noise, those who master peace become the truest teachers, reminding everyone that the most profound truths are often spoken in silence. Disappearing is not escaping. It's returning home to self. Spiritually awake people are often misunderstood when they step back from the world. Others see absence, distance, even abandonment. But in truth, it's a conscious journey inward, a reclaiming of what was always theirs. They spent so much of their lives bending to expectations, echoing opinions that weren't theirs, chasing goals that didn't satisfy the soul. And one day, they wake up to realize that the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more authenticity. So they step back, not out of fear or surrender, but out of reverence for their own essence. Imagine a person who has always been the caretaker, the mediator, the one everyone leans on. For years, they gave pieces of themselves to fix everything around them. Slowly, their energy begins to fade. One morning, they realize that in saving everyone else, they have forgotten themselves. They take a pause. They stop answering every call, stop attending every obligation, stop sacrificing their peace for the comfort of others. At first, people react with confusion or concern. Why are they disappearing? They ask. But the spiritually awake know that this withdrawal is not loss. It is restoration. It is a return to clarity, to alignment, to the center of their own being. There's a subtle courage in this kind of disappearing. It's not dramatic or loud. It's quiet, steadfast, and unwavering. They choose solitude over chaos, reflection over reaction, self-care over external approval. They spend mornings in stillness, noticing the light through the window, listening to the whispers of their own heart, breathing in the life they had almost forgotten. They spend evenings in gratitude, appreciating the small details that were once overlooked. They stop seeking validation from those who never understood them, and begin honoring the voice inside that always knew the way. Sometimes, returning home to self looks like saying no when every instinct says yes. Sometimes it looks like leaving spaces where they were taken for granted. Sometimes it is as simple as sitting in silence, feeling the rhythm of their own heartbeat, and realizing that this is where true freedom begins. They are not cutting ties out of spite. They are untangling themselves from energies that no longer serve them, from patterns that no longer resonate, from expectations that never belonged to them. In doing so, they reclaim their life, their focus, and their joy. A quote comes to mind: "You cannot pour from an empty cup." Spiritually awake people understand this profoundly. They have poured for years, and now they are learning to refill themselves. They return to the parts of life that nourish them: creativity, nature, meditation, introspection, meaningful connections. They rediscover who they are when no one is watching, who they are without the need to perform or please. And in this discovery, they find a depth of peace and strength that was always within, waiting for them to come home. The beauty of this journey is that it is deeply personal and deeply transformative. People may misunderstand it, label it, or even criticize it, but that doesn't matter. What matters is a reconnection to self, the reclaiming of time, energy, and presence. In returning home, they remember what it feels like to be aligned, grounded, and fully alive. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, their energy shifts the world around them. Others notice the change, not because it is loud, but because authenticity always leaves an impression. Disappearing into oneself is a sacred act. It is not avoidance. It is mastery. It is not loneliness. It is communion with the most important presence in life, the self. And in that return, they rediscover the truth that the soul was never lost, only waiting patiently for them to come back and remember who they truly are. Oh, I ask you today, what are you chasing? Noise or peace? approval or authenticity. The world is loud. The world is restless. The world is asleep, but you don't have to be. You don't have to follow the crowd. You don't have to dim your light. You don't have to surrender your soul to chaos. Step back. Step inward. Step into your own truth. Protect your peace. Guard your energy. Choose presence over reaction. Choose calm over conflict. Choose yourself every single day. Because the spiritually awake are disappearing. Not because they've given up, but because they've chosen to live differently. And if you wait too long, if you hesitate, if you ignore the whispers of your own heart, you might wake up one day and realize that peace has already passed you by. So I urge you now, choose stillness, choose silence, choose awakening. Not tomorrow, not next week, today, right now. The world can wait. Your soul cannot. Remember this. The loudest way to change your life is to live it quietly, fully, intentionally. The loudest way to awaken your soul is to stop seeking the world's permission to be yourself. The loudest way to leave a mark on this world is to simply return to who you were always meant to be. And when you do, when you finally step into your own light, you won't need to shout. You won't need to prove anything, because your presence, your peace, your awakened soul will speak louder than any words ever could. So don't disappear into distractions. Don't disappear into conformity. Disappear into yourself. Return home. Return to truth. Return to the power, the peace, and the purpose that has been waiting for you all along. Because the world may forget, the world may doubt, the world may try to pull you back. But the one thing it can never take away is the soul that is truly awakened. Your support means everything. If this resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe. And that, my friends, is the quietest, strongest revolution you will ever witness. Thank you for being here. See you in the next one.